Hey everybody, this is Ryan Llewellyn with Red Dragon Herbs. Well, I was asked to give a presentation about tea to the class, and I'm not able to make it on evenings typically, but figured this video would be the next best thing we can do. So I apologize for that, and I will be here to answer questions if anyone has any. My contact info will be on the handout, or you can just email info@reddragonherbs.net, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. All right, so I, along with my wife, own a small business here in Des Moines called Red Dragon Herbs. And we don't have a store. We do like the farmers markets, craft shows, and online sales too. And we mainly focus on herbal tea blends, but we also have some, real tea and so forth. And this is a business we've had. This is our third year, and it's going pretty good. We've done fairly well with it. I'm pretty proud of what we've done. And this is something that I got into several years ago because I would grow a lot of stuff in my backyard. And one of the things I would do with, like, say, this peppermint, chamomile, catnip, and so forth that I'd grow is I would make my own herbal tea blends. And, I'd also buy herbs in bulk and, kind of blend this or that or whatever. And we decided to scale it up, and here we are now, I guess. But the point of this video is that I want to give you guys a solid foundation in the world of tea. And I'm going to do it from the perspective of the food service industry, which admittedly is something I don't have a whole lot of experience in. I've never really worked in a restaurant other than when I was 14. I washed dishes under the table at some place downtown. But, that's been a little while. And some of the things we're going to talk about today is the different types of tea, how to make them, just some kind of little things about, say, storing tea and presenting tea, I guess, and some of the questions or comments that you might come across from customers, I guess, in the future. Now, tea itself is something that's seen some growth in recent years in the U.S. In the Western world, we've been drinking tea for like 400 years now. And in the Eastern world, China and so forth, they've been drinking tea for thousands of years. So it's something that's been around a while, but here in the U.S., it's definitely not as popular as coffee, but, and honestly, probably never will be. But it is a growth industry, I guess, and you are going to be more likely to come across tea, I guess, in the future. All right, so there's a couple of important things to know, and probably the most important thing to know is that there's a right way and there's a wrong way to make tea. And when we talk about the different types of tea, we'll talk about how to make each, what kind of the special characteristics of each one. Now, I don't know if you'll necessarily remember all these, but just do know that there is a right way and wrong way to make tea. So in the future, if you find yourself having to make tea, you'll know to look it up if you don't remember. So that's the important thing. All right, now tea is going to need to be brewed at the right temperature of water, and it needs to steep, or infuse, which means to sit in that water for a certain amount of time. Black teas are going to be a little bit longer, green teas shorter, and so forth. But what this does, it basically releases the oils in the tea, and that's what gives tea its flavor. So if the water is not hot enough, it's not going to release those oils, and you're not going to have like a cup of tea like you want. Or if you don't let it sit in there long enough, it won't be strong enough either. And then again, if you let it sit for too long, sometimes it can scald the tea. Sometimes it could make the taste off. Or sometimes if the water's too hot, it can burn the tea and it gives it an off taste. So it is important to know what you're doing with tea. Fortunately, it sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not. The other thing that's important to know is a lot of times you'll be using tea bags, and that's just fine too. But sometimes you might be using something like this, just some kind of like mesh infuser, and it's important for the water to have room to circulate in the tea. So something like this is good for about 1 cup per se, but I would never fill this thing all the way up, because if you do, the tea leaves expand, and it's going to take up all the space in there basically. And you could get a weaker cup of tea because the water just can't circulate through the tea as it would if there was actually space for it. So that's an important concept to know in the world of making tea. All right, we'll move on to the different types of tea. The first thing, one thing that's very important to know, and this is kind of definitely a day one thing for the world of tea, is we'll talk about black tea, green tea, white tea, but it's all the same plant. There's not a green tea plant, there's not a black tea plant, a white tea plant or anything. It's all based on how it's processed, and that's what makes the different types of tea. So it's all the Camellia sinensis is the scientific name for it, but it's all that plant. And it's kind of done situationally. You know, some places they like their tea a different way, and that's how they do it there or whatnot. So yeah, all the same plant, but just how they process it. And another thing that's interesting about that before we get in there is that tea in a lot of ways is almost kind of like wine, where there's going to be different, I guess, flavors, notes, or whatever the terminology is, based on where the grape is grown, the climate, the soil type, this and that. It's the same thing with tea. Throughout the world of tea, there's many different like little types of tea, I guess, like underneath these larger categories that have different characteristics. And some of them have kind of interesting little stories that go along with them too. So if you are interested, I do invite you to check that out. And just know that we're just going to scratch the surface today. All right, so the most common type of tea that you'll probably come across, and the most common one in our part of the world certainly, is black tea. And black tea is like if you would buy, a box of like Lipton tea, that's going to be black tea. If you get like an English breakfast, that's a black tea. And also an Earl Grey is typically a black tea, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But black tea is black because it's oxidized. And, if you've ever had a banana peel and let it sit out for a while, and when it dries it turns black, it's the same thing. And that's what gives the black tea its black color. And then when it brews up, it kind of has that like kind of brown, amberish color to it. But black tea is typically considered a bolder flavor than other types of tea. It's generally considered to have more caffeine, and some of that is true, but some of it is also based on how the caffeine releases into the tea compared to other ones. But black tea is seen as having higher caffeine than other types of tea, and generally that is correct. The flavors of black tea can kind of really run the gauntlet. You might have a very bold smoky type, like a Huqua, which is really smoky, or a Russian Caravan, which is slightly smoky. And it goes all the way to, say, maybe a Darjeeling, which comes from a very unique part of India in the Himalayan foothills. And it's influenced by its climate, and it gives it a very almost wine-like, like wine grape taste to it. Just like a kind of a fruity, very light flavor to it. So black tea is also, I don't know, maybe considered a little bit more higher class, maybe a little bit more what I would see somebody ordering in a restaurant compared to other types of tea. I guess maybe I don't know about that, but that is definitely the one people are going to be the most familiar with. Now, black tea is going to be the most forgiving of the teas as far as how to make it. Typically, you'd want the water just under boiling. So, if you're bringing water up to boiling and then take it off boiling, it's probably going to be about that right temperature, about 210, 205 or so. Remember from physics class, boiling is 212 Fahrenheit. And let it steep for about 5 minutes. And you'll have a good cup of tea at that point. If you do it a little bit less than that, you might have a weaker cup of tea. If the water is not that hot, you might have a weaker cup of tea too. You can oversteep it by letting it sit longer than 5 minutes. So I would just use that boiling in 5 minutes for black tea as a good go-to time, I guess, for that. Now, I mentioned Earl Grey, and Earl Grey is not a type of tea per se. It's a black tea with bergamot oil in it. And what bergamot is, it's a European orange that grows in Italy. And this orange is not very good for eating like fresh, like a navel orange or whatnot that you might get from Florida. But they use it a lot for perfume. It smells really good, whatnot, and they use it to flavor this tea. And Earl Grey is probably something you'll be likely to encounter in a restaurant situation. It typically has the connotations of being an upper class tea, kind of like a fancier tea. Captain Picard of Star Trek: The Next Generation likes his hot, I guess. But in places like England, Australia, it is definitely associated with the upper class. That kind of the hoity-toity people or whatever drink Earl Grey, and it's a little bit like that here too, where maybe in a fancier dining situation, Earl Grey might be one of the teas that people would tend to go to. All right, now the next one we'll talk about, and probably the next most common, is green tea. And green tea is green because it's pretty much just the leaves are just dehydrated, and they keep their green color and flavor too. So they're a little bit more vegetal, I guess you would say, compared to black tea. The flavor is a little bit more delicate typically, and definitely the brew that you get is going to be lighter. Now, the important thing to know about green tea is that it is very possible to screw this up if you try to make it. Green tea needs a lower temperature and a lower steeping time. So typically you would want about 180 degrees water and brew it for about 3 minutes. Let it steep for 3 minutes. Now, most people don't carry around a thermometer, I guess, to measure the temperature of their water. So you can kind of eyeball it a little bit. Like usually if you bring water up to a boil and let it sit for about a minute or so, it's going to cool down to about that temperature. Or what some people will do is they would put a splash of cold water in the cup and then put the boiled water in there too. And usually that'll be about fine. But if you oversteep green tea, it's going to give it a very, I think it's kind of a fishy taste, kind of a bitter taste. And most of the time when people say they don't like green tea, it's usually because they're doing it wrong. So, if you do find yourself in a situation where you're making green tea, definitely know that it's a little bit more touchy, so do it right and you'll have a very nice cup of tea. I really like the flavors of green tea, when done correctly. Green tea is typically considered to be healthier than black tea. And yeah, that is true. My only problem with that statement is that sometimes I think people will say that to the exclusion of black tea. Like black tea doesn't have health benefits, and it absolutely does. It's a very healthy drink. Tea in general is very healthy to drink. But green tea has more vitamins and minerals than black tea and more antioxidants. It keeps those properties a little bit more than the black tea does. So typically you may find green tea in kind of more health conscious settings, I guess. Like, say you're in a restaurant that kind of caters more towards health conscious people. You might be more prone towards green tea, I guess. Now, green tea is also going to be more common in other parts of the world than ours. For instance, in China, they drink a lot more green tea than we do here. But green tea in the past decade or so definitely has gotten a lot more popular in our part of the world. So that is one that you will encounter. The next one we'll talk about is oolong. And sometimes you might see it as woolong too. And oolongs have become popular past couple of years, really. There's been kind of an increase in interest in these. There's been some people that have kind of sang the praises of oolong as far as their health benefits, and To be honest, I don't think it's necessarily like a lot more healthy than green tea or black tea or anything. It's kind of a matter of perception. They're all healthy drinks or whatnot, but that's my opinion, I guess. But oolongs are going to be kind of in between green tea and black tea as far as how they're processed. They're just going to be partially oxidized. So they're not going to be like as black as the black teas, but they still have a little bit of their green character to it. And the taste of oolongs are very nice for one, but they kind of run the gauntlet between. Sometimes you might find some ones that are kind of more like stone fruit, like apricot, peach, and they also kind of have like some kind of very like woody and like green tones to them too. But yeah, very good tea. They have been. You've seen more of these lately. I think Dr. Oz actually talked quite a bit about oolong tea. So a lot of times when we have people come up and they're asking for oolong tea, sometimes like I'll think in my head, it's like, oh, do you watch Dr. Oz? And usually it seems to be the case, I guess. But they're also seen to be a little bit more healthy because I guess I'm not even sure why people think they're that much healthier than black tea, I guess. But they are very good. Most oolongs will typically come from Taiwan or sometimes coastal China. And there's a wide range of oolongs. And like I said, they've got a pretty interesting flavor range. So, and they also hold up very well to re-steeping. Typically with most tea, you'll get about 1.5 good cups maybe, but oolongs usually do a pretty good job of doing it, 2-3 times or whatever. Now, when they process oolong tea, they're twisted, and I wish I would have brought a little oolong leaf in with me, but they're kind of cool because they do look like dragon tails. And in fact, the name oolong actually means black dragon because they say that the tea leaf looks like a little like black dragon or whatever. So that is kind of cool little story with that. So if you get a chance to check out an oolong, I highly advise it. The next type of tea that we'll talk about that you might come across is a white tea. And again, white tea has become more popular in just really the past few years. And white tea, it's basically just the buds from the tea leaf, and it's very, very minimally processed. There's not a lot done to it. If you look at white tea compared to, like, say, a black tea or green tea, it really does look more just like plucked leaves compared to, black tea or green tea where they typically do some sort of processing to the leaves. But the brew on white tea is going to be very light, very crisp, very refreshing. It makes it really good tea if you get a good cup of white tea. And people will say the health benefits are higher even than green tea because it's less processed and everything stays in there, I guess, a little bit better. Which is true. It's going to be higher in antioxidants and vitamins and minerals than even green tea. So you'll get a lot of health benefits from white tea. And that's probably where most of the, demand for white tea will come from, is kind of the more health-conscious crowd. It pairs very well with fruit flavors. I know we have one that's like a tangerine white from time to time, like an orange blossom white, and those flavors go very well together. But white tea is very delicate to make. You're going to want a really low temperature, like maybe 170, and about 3 minutes. That's it. If you don't want to overbrew it. If the water is too hot, you can easily scald the leaves and get like a bitter cup of tea. So just remember, white tea is very touchy, but if you do it right, it's a really nice tea drinking experience. There's also yellow tea, and yellow tea is something that's pretty rare. And to be quite honest, you're probably not going to come across it unless you go looking for it. I can't think of any restaurants or anything around here that would serve yellow tea, but there is a yellow tea, I guess, and now that I think about it, I'm not even sure if I've even had a yellow tea, but I do know they exist. All right, I'll talk about a couple of other things that This isn't a type of tea, but it's going to be a flavor of tea, I guess, that you're going to be likely to encounter, and that's chai. You may have gone to Starbucks and had a chai latte, this or that, or whatever. And that's something that's gained a lot of popularity in the past 10 years or so. But what chai is, it's a little misleading, actually, the word chai. The word chai actually means tea. Pretty much, well, more than half of the world calls tea chai because that's what it's called in the Chinese dialect of some part of China, I guess, like where tea comes from. And in another part of China, the word for what we call tea is like tea or something resembling tea. And the parts of the world that receive tea via the land from this part of China, like Russia, the Middle East, India, and so forth, will call tea chai. But those of us, like Great Britain, the United States, France, Latin America, so forth, that receive tea via sea trade, they got it from the coastal areas of China, we'll call it tea. So if you ever studied French or Spanish, the word for tea is very similar to, or te, basically, in both languages. So anyway, I guess that's kind of a little rant or side tale there. But chai, the correct word for it would be like chai masala. Masala is the spice blend. So you're going to have a black tea with, it can vary a little bit, but typically cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, vanilla, black pepper, and those Indian spices is what makes the chai. And so that's something you might encounter too. Another thing that you might encounter is matcha. That's something that's been kind of popular in the past couple of years, but what that is, it's a Japanese green tea that's shade grown, and it's the whole leaf that's ground into a fine powder. And there are finer qualities of matcha that people would use for like the Japanese tea ceremonies, and then there's culinary grade matcha, which people would typically put like in smoothies or use to flavor something as like tea flavor. In fact, in the mail just yesterday, we got some Kit Kat bars from Japan, and they're matcha flavored. It's kind of cool, I guess. I should have brought those in, I guess, but they've got the little matcha with the whisk on the package and so forth. So they taste pretty good too, for what that's worth. But they use matcha sometimes to flavor like ice cream and candies and this and that. It is something that you might be likely to encounter, matcha tea, and a lot of people like it for the health benefits. You're ingesting the whole leaf instead of just an infusion of the leaf, and so you're going to get more antioxidants and vitamins and so forth. The other thing that you might encounter is herbal teas, and technically they're not supposed to be called tea because when we say tea, we're referring to the product from this one plant, the tea plant. So, technically the right thing to call these, like, it would be like a peppermint tisane or infusion. But most people use the word tea, and, I don't see any problems with saying like peppermint tea, chamomile tea. But what this is, it's basically making an infusion from herbs. And there's quite a bit out there. The most common ones are going to be like peppermint and chamomile, I would say. And sometimes you'll see these herbs blended with, real tea per se. For instance, a very common blend is Moroccan mint, which is green tea, spearmint, and peppermint. A lot of people like the herbal blends because they or herbal teas because they typically contain no caffeine or very low caffeine if they're mixed with something. So that's something out there you might come across. There's also, under the framework of herbal teas, yerba mate, which is from South America. It's one that has a little bit of caffeine. It's kind of smoky, grassy. And I don't know, it was kind of becoming popular a while back ago. It's kind of fizzled out. I really like it though. Rooibos tea, which comes from South Africa. It's a red bush. That's actually what the name rooibos means in Afrikaans, red bush. And that's a very nice herbal, caffeine-free too. All right. So another thing that I guarantee you're going to come across if you work with tea at all in the restaurant industry. If people ask you for tea, they might ask you for an orange pico tea. And okay, tea is graded. The leaves are graded by their quality, and there's a different scale, but orange pico is kind of a higher grade. And on a lot of tea bags, it'll say like 100% orange pico, and it's kind of a common misconception that orange pico is a type of tea. So if somebody asks you for orange pico tea, they're probably just asking for a just kind of a normal black tea, basically. So you don't have to like correct them and kind of give them the well actually, just give them a nice cup of black tea, and that's probably what they want. Um, let's see here, sweetening tea. Um, a lot of people like their tea sweetened. I personally don't, but the best thing to use to sweeten tea is going to be rock sugar. If you have to use granular sugar, that's better than nothing. Some people might like honey, especially like in a green tea or whatever, but typically rock sugar is going to be the best option for sweetening tea. Sometimes people will want milk or cream with it too. So it's best in a restaurant situation. I guess I would say to serve tea with, maybe ask if they want sugar and cream, and of course serve it with the saucer and the teaspoon, so they can mix it in as they choose. Some people might like a lemon slice with it too, or whatever. That's kind of a nice little touch, especially with like a green tea or something, or an Earl Grey, where it's already kind of citrusy. On the side, of course. Tea doesn't take a lot of special equipment to make. Probably what you're most likely to encounter is going to be the pre-bagged tea. If not, there's a lot of different like infusers like this out there on the market that are good for making like a cup at a time. Like I said, definitely don't fill it full. That's a very important thing. So, and as long as you have something that will get water to the right temperature, you don't really need a whole lot to pull tea off. Storage. This is an important one too. Tea doesn't necessarily go bad. You're not going to get like expired tea necessarily per se, but after about a year, it starts to lose its flavor a little bit. And if you're in a restaurant situation, you're definitely going to want to serve people the nicest cup of tea possible. Personally, I have tea in my cupboard that might be a few years old that I would have no problem drinking myself. But you're going to want the nicest quality, I guess, for people. But yeah, so like after a year, that's maybe when you might want to think about getting rid of it. But then again, it's not going to like expire and go bad or whatnot. The best way to store tea is going to be in an airtight container in a place that's dark and maybe slightly cool. So like in your home, if you just put it in an airtight container in a dark cupboard, you're going to be fine. Definitely don't store different types of tea together because, just like with any other herb or spice or whatever, they can absorb the flavors of each other. And you definitely don't want that. There's also, I guess, the debate between bags and loose leaf. Like I said, in most restaurant situations, you're probably going to have tea bags, and that's definitely what most people are familiar with. But there are high quality teas that you can get in tea bags for sure, and those will probably be just fine. Typically, the bag tea is going to be like maybe have a stronger flavor, but using loose leaf and putting in some kind of infuser like this. Maybe is going to be a higher quality flavor, if that makes sense. So, just kind of your choice on that. Personally, for my own personal drinking, I tend to go towards loose leaf just because, well, for one, it ends up being a lot cheaper, I guess, but there's just a whole wide range of things out there, and typically for bag tea, you're going to be limited by what people will bag for you, which, admittedly, there's quite a bit out there that's bagged or whatever. But, yeah, that's about it. I guess we're coming up on half an hour. I think I've covered pretty much all the important things to get you started on tea. Um, like I said, there's a whole interesting world of tea out there. There's a lot of different options. It is something cool to really start digging into. And if you have any questions or need some clarification on anything, or any feedback or whatnot, again, my email address will be info@reddragonherbs.net, or you can find us on Facebook. Just type in Red Dragon Herbs and Teas. We're on Instagram as well too. So yeah, get in touch if you would like, and thanks for watching this. And I hope this has been something of a help. I hope you will consider tea, I guess, in the future. And good luck in your endeavors. Thank you.